Of Harley Schlanger. Harley, what's the latest news?
Well, the Greek government just put out a new report which confirms what Lyndon LaRouche had said back in, I believe it was February, which is that the Greek debt, which is being used to strangle the country, is, quote, illegal, illegitimate, and odious. And what they point out is that not only do they not have the ability to pay the debt, but they should not pay the debt because it emerged from the Troika's arrangements, the Troika being the IMF, the EU, and the European Central Bank, which is a direct infringement on the rights of the people of Greece. And what they show in a very succinct report is that before the Troika took control, the Troika took control in 2009 because there was a sovereign debt crisis, but before they took control, that the Greek debt, the public debt, was not due to excessive public spending. In fact, it was lower than the public spending of other Eurozone countries. Yet if you listen to what the EU and others are saying, the Greeks were just frivolous, they spent money, they wasted money, and so on. But they said that it was the payment of extremely high rates of interest to creditors, which was based on the policies of the IMF and the European Central Bank to force them to pay down the debt of private banks and private companies that lost out as of the 2008 crash, that the Greek government was forced to take on that debt. And then it was covered by bonds that were sold by companies such as Goldman Sachs that forced them to buy credit default swaps and debt risk arrangements that added to the debt up to the $360 billion level where it is today. Now, they then go on to say they've already paid back $260 billion, so that the fact that they still owe $360 more is what they call illegitimate, illegal, and odious debt. Right. Now, this is important because at the end of the month, they will be probably held in default. And the Germans, under the finance minister Schäuble, working with the largest banks in Europe, are trying to figure out how to get more money for Greece, or from Greece, rather, to pay the debt that they claim is owed by Greece. And so we're in a situation where a default is likely. The Greek government is saying they don't want to leave the euro, but if the euro is going to do this to them, they'll have no choice if the EU is doing this to them. So we've come to what is really a turning point in the overall situation in Europe. Now, it's not just for Europe, because U.S. banks are heavily invested in this Greek debt operation, and they've been buying foreign exchange derivatives based on expectations of the solvency of the euro, the pound, and other currencies, which will be negatively affected by whatever happens in Greece. And so it means that U.S. banks have a stake in this agreement or non-agreement. That's why Jack Lew, Obama's Treasury Secretary, who's a flunky for Wall Street, has been telling the Greeks, look, be reasonable, work out a deal. And the Greeks are saying, we can't work out a deal because we've shrunk our economy by 1/4. 25% shrinkage since we've had this IMF policy. We now have 26% of our population unemployed. We've had 400,000 bankruptcies in the last 2 years. And so they're saying we cannot continue doing this. And so you've the old saying, push comes to shove. Well, we're a little bit beyond that now. We've already gone over the cliff.
Right. So what we're facing now is and this is what I've talked about on previous shows, that the analysis of your work, the LaRouche Foundation, Gerald Salente's work, the work of Joel Scows and others, there is going to be a major world correction in the economy, and there has to be some dialogue between the BRICS nations and these criminal international bankers. They have to stop what they're doing because nations aren't going to cooperate anymore, and when Greece pulls this, the whole derivatives market for the European Central Banks is going to go belly up. There's just no way around it, is there?
No, and the problem is that the Actually, not the problem. This is not just going to stop with Greece. Last Saturday, there were mayoral elections in Spain, and in the two largest cities, Madrid and Barcelona, the new opposition that's allied with the Greek ruling party of Syriza, called Podemos, they won the elections. So you have mayors in the two largest cities of Spain who are saying the Spanish debt is illegal. You have a similar motion in Portugal. And in Italy, the Italian prime minister is basically dancing on the head of a pin, trying to triangulate between Europe and the United States on the one side and Russia on the other. So when you say the BRICS and the West should negotiate, of course they should. This is what China's president has said to the United States. He said, let's work together, let's collaborate. That's a win-win situation.
Well, there's a principle in the ancient Israel that there had to be a forgiveness of debt on the seventh year, the Shemitah year. And that process is with the opposite is happening. That's why throughout the ancient world there was a proscription against the charging of interest, which of course the Vatican allowed through the Sabbatean Satanistic Jewish banks because it was a mortal sin in the Catholic Church for 1,000 years. So the real issue is we have no forgiveness of debt here, and without forgiveness of debt, there's going to be a world collapse in the economy that's going to kill a lot of people.
And who would suffer the most from a writing down of debt? The speculators, who are saying that government should bail them out at the expense of the people who live under those governments. Yeah. Now, there's an interesting, at the end of the Greek report, they quote Pericles' funeral oration, in which he says, as for the name of the constitution of the Athenian people, it is called a democracy, for the administration is run with a view to the interests of the many, not of the few. And that's the idea that, of course, Plato corrected that by saying it should be a republic rather than a democracy, but the idea is that you represent the interests of the whole population, not the few oligarchs. And our country and Western Europe is now of, by, and for the oligarchs.
Well, the thing is, even the Trans-Pacific and Transatlantic partnerships are to consolidate further power and control and money in the hands of a very tiny clique.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's
totally unacceptable.
Well, that's why it's important that even though there were bad reasons for the vote, the good reason was that the Trans-Pacific Partnership of Obama was rejected by a collaboration of libertarian Republicans and mainstream Democrats. In fact, the Democratic Party is in a full-scale revolt against the president. And this is the opportunity. If the Republicans weren't such damn opportunists and such cowards, we could get Obama out. That's the important thing here, because what we're seeing in the U.S., what we're seeing in Greece, is that the people are finally saying, we're not going to pay for the benefit of the few.
Yeah, exactly.
But we don't have leaders who will act on that, and that's what we've got to create.
Well, I think what's happening is that there's going to be a big shakeup, and my guess is a lot of the pseudo-candidates like Jeb Bush, who went to the Bilderberger meeting and tried to hide it, Hillary Clinton, who's got this candidacy where she doesn't think she needs to move from the left to the center, who thinks she can just get elected by, trying to give out free stuff to, it's obscene. And actually, the fact is that the amount of money that she and her husband have made through their foundation through what I call unethical means, and then tell the people how they need to take from the rich and give to the poor. No, they're going to take for the slightly wealthy to give to the poor, and the mega wealthy are going to make off like bandits. That's what's happening.
Well, they're not. What makes you think Hillary Clinton really wants to give something to the poor? I mean,
she'll tell them that. Yeah, she'll tell them that. Again, it's the same thing as the average black person is earning less and much more unemployed, and Obamacare is going to go up 40% next year. 7 million people got insurance, but probably another 30 or 40 million lost their insurance because of his policies. No control of costs, a crazy system that's out of control. Again, that's everything about the opportunistic politicians. And we're back with Harley. Harley, let's continue with this remarkable dialogue, what's going on. I really don't think people understand just how serious the situation is, do they?
Well, there are two aspects to it. I want to talk now just about the collapse of Obama And then the second half of the show, we ought to talk about how close we are moving toward an actual war situation, because that's what people have no understanding of. But look, we have to give people a sense you can deal with the crisis. You and I have been talking about impeaching Obama for 4 or 5 years. And people just say, it's all talk, you'll never do it. Well, what happened last week, the day after the last time I was on, was a tremendous defeat for the president. I don't care how anyone's trying to spin it. What happened was last Wednesday night, Obama went to the annual Republican-Democratic softball game, and when he got there, the Republicans started chanting TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. And Obama gave him a big smile and a thumbs up, and the Democrats looked at him enraged because he never talks to the Democrats. He never sees most of these congressmen. Someone wrote in Huffington Post that the only time these Democrats could get to see Obama is if they dressed up as Republicans on Halloween and trick-or-treated at the White House.
Oh, no.
So what happened then is the next day Obama put out the word he wanted to meet with the House Democrats. So all the Democrats crowded into this meeting room. Obama came in. He didn't shake hands. He didn't smile. He came in and he said, look, here's the deal. And he went through a lying report on how he's made sure that the Trans-Pacific Partnership would not be like NAFTA, which is just not true. The reason he could get away with it or try to get away with it is that most of the Democrats haven't had a chance to see it because it's classified. And then he said, I need your votes. This is no longer an issue about trade. It's an issue about me and my presidency. And he went into a thing to try to shame them into thinking that if they didn't vote for him, they were being racist. Now, this led someone who's been a long-time supporter of Obama, DeFazio, the congressman from Oregon, to yell out as Obama was leaving, this meeting is bullshit. It led Keith Ellison and Raul Gaviria of the Progressive Caucus to say the president disrespected members of the Congress. Another Democrat said,
no kidding.
We never see the guy. All of a sudden he shows up and tells us that we're not helping him. Where the hell has he been? Now, Bill Moyers, who goes back to Lyndon Johnson in the days when Johnson was Senate Majority Leader, has a column that makes the following point. And I want to read this so your listeners get a sense of how the Democratic Party is splitting on this. He said he's talking about the tremendous pro-democracy victory when the top-secret Trans-Pacific Partnership was defeated. And he said, the unholy trio of Republican Senate Majority Leader McConnell, House Speaker Boehner, and President Obama, and then he writes in parentheses, a Democrat, in case you're having trouble remembering, are as one in a desperate effort to rescue their Frankenstein-like creation. And then he said the only hope is to bribe, browbeat, or brainwash enough House members to change their minds. It could still happen. Now, what Moyers and others are saying is that Obama is pulling the FBI files on Democrats. And he's basically saying, we know you did this, we know you slept with this man or this woman or this dog, we have the files, you better come along with us. Now, he's also going to the supporters in the Black Caucus saying, look, I couldn't do what you wanted me to do because remember Lincoln, remember Kennedy, remember Martin Luther King? And apparently one member of the Black Caucus said, but Mr. President, you're not a Martin Luther King.
Right.
Now, people are beginning to speak up. And the fact that the Democratic Party, even Pelosi, because of the pressure from the constituents, was forced to reject Obama on this one. Now, what about the Republicans? You had about 60 mostly Tea Party types, Ron Paul-type libertarians, who voted with the Democrats to scuttle the bill. But the majority of the Republicans, including all the Senate and House leaders, are arm in arm with Obama on this. They're defending Obama. They're backing him up. Now, this shows why they didn't go for impeachment, because they're so committed to a corporate financial dictatorship that they're in bed with Obama on this one, because Obama is a corporate fascist.
Right.
And so is Mitch McConnell, and so is John Boehner. And so if Americans realize this, then you realize we're beginning to see a break with this corporate fascism, whether it's Bernie Sanders. People don't like the fact that he called himself a socialist. Who the hell cares? He's attacking Wall Street the same way Rand Paul is attacking Wall Street, the same way Martin O'Malley is attacking Wall Street. Elizabeth Warren, I don't care if people call themselves liberals or conservatives or Austrian school or what. The primary problem in this country is the same problem Greece has. A huge debt has been built up illegitimately that's gone mostly into the pockets of Wall Street and City of London types and has been taken away from us, the people. And it's both parties working together on it, but we're starting to see a break, and we've got to force that break through.
Yeah, it really is at a break point now where both parties are going to have to change internally. And we might actually have a real election if we don't have martial law caused by major terrorism. That's the other concern I have. And I know Joel Skousen says that he doesn't think major terrorism will happen. I think Obama is due for an ISIS or an ISIL terrorism on American soil so he can stay in power or even overturn the amendments to stop term limits for the U.S. president. And I wouldn't be surprised if the fighting going on in the Democratic Party, if Obama pulls off a stunt to deep six the candidacy of not only Hillary Clinton, but it'll be too late to get an alternative, and then he will run for a third term. And it wouldn't be surprising if the Republicans back him.
I think Obama would have as much chance of getting, even if he ran every single voting machine in the country, the machines would revolt. So I don't think we have to worry about a third term of Obama.
I think the Republicans would vote multiple times to make sure he stays in power at the rate that
I think what we have to worry about is that he's about to push us into a nuclear war. And I have a great deal of material to go through after the break on people who are now saying precisely that. Like Lee Butler,
this goes through the bullet points before the break that I know of. There is a alignment. The Russians have now got 40 new nuclear weapons that they've had added to their stockpile because of the increasing bad situation with the West. We have the Russians lining their nuclear missiles along the European border. We have the Poroshenko going on a buying spree, buying all kinds of hardware and equipment for a war. We have this breakaway republic that's near Moldova that's trying to break away, and the situation is lining up where they're going to be literally having to fly in supplies to the Russian citizens in this area. This is getting very nuts, and you're right. I think what's going on in the Middle East and Ukraine, we are very close to a major military conflict with Russia and China.
Yep.
Yeah, let's go over the details when we come back. And welcome back. And Harley, we needed to dissect the issues of impending war. The economic phase of World War III, even stated by what I call the very disturbing comments by the globalist Pope, who's now pushing for a carbon tax and asking for $850 billion from America to start trying to turn back the tide of CO2 and climate change. This fool needs to shut his mouth. And believe me, I can tell you this, and I'll defend it to the hilt. The Pope is not a Christian. And I can tell you he's a globalist. He's backing policies that are going to kill a lot of people. And when I hear these comments, we don't realize that we're heading toward war, because the globalist bankers, when all else fails and they can't get control of the world economy and they're having a fit, they basically are going to pull the world toward a world war and think, well, no, we can still survive this. And we know there's billionaires out there that have two clues and aren't as evil. And they're freaked out by what's going on because they realize when the Russians are lining up weapons, when we're lining up weapons, when the Russians see our deployment of first strike weapons to knock their launch phase nuclear weapons, they know that we're getting ready for a great big first strike conflict. And the Russian policy may not be waiting until we're on their border. But, you know, this is good. We're on the march toward a war with Russia and China. There's no doubt in my mind at all.
Well, I can say some things about the Pope's impending encyclical. Most importantly, the person who's the leading mentor behind it, who's a German Nazi anti-human named Schellenhuber, who we've exposed over the years. he's someone who is pushing Merkel's policy. Remember, Merkel was the one who said at the Obama-Merkel summit, we have to decarbonize the economy, as if we could still survive if you get rid of all forms of carbon and carbon dioxide. But in any case,
people are carbon-based units, so I guess it must include us.
Of course, and we're the biggest emitters of carbon dioxide. So when we breathe, so maybe we should all stop breathing so the planet could heal without mankind on it.
Well, first off,
that's
the
what
carbon
you get with
action cycle.
Schellenhuber, and if the Pope puts his stamp of approval on this is a satanic document.
Yeah,
I'm not sure whether the Pope fully understands it or not. But
I know he does, actually. He's an evil bastard. That's the nicest thing I can say about him, because even Malachi, the ancient Greek monk, prophesied that this would be the last pope. This is the anti-pope. All of his words coming out of his mouth, including endorsing atheism and other isms, transhumanism. Come on, it's a big tent, don't worry. This guy is completely off his rocker.
Well, the most important issue for the church, and the place where they've always drawn the line, is on defense of population growth and the sanctity of life and the importance of children, and
this is
a step against that. And if so, this is anti-Christian. But let's go to the war danger quickly.
Right.
I told you a couple of these points. General Lee Butler, who was the head of nuclear forces for the United States, 91 to 94, put out a statement the other day saying he's not sleeping at night because of the moves that are occurring primarily by the United States, which he said are putting us on a course toward war, including nuclear war. And he said it's because of the use of the word deterrence. And he said he'd like to get this word out of the vocabulary because people who are developing U.S. nuclear plans actually think that a combination of cyber warfare and precise targeted intermediate-range nuclear forces could neutralize a Soviet retaliatory strike. So we could deter that strike and therefore win a nuclear war. And what he's saying is what every sane person who's ever dealt with nuclear weapons says: you can't fight a nuclear war without triggering the destruction of the human race. Now, this was also a statement made by Russian General Ivashov, who said if the U.S. continues to move weapons toward Russia, Russia will retaliate by moving weapons to the border. But these are all weapons inside Russia. But he said the Russians cannot wait. If you have weapons, including nuclear weapons in Poland, in the Baltic states, in Romania, the Russians know there's only one reason for that, which is the intent to force the Russians to either submit to the West or fight a war. Now, that's you mentioned, Dr. Deagle. Putin had a press conference yesterday announcing they have 40 new ICBMs that have a capability to be protected against anti-missile warfare.
Right.
What Mr. LaRouche said last night is we should take Putin at his word, but it's important that he's publicly talking about it because he's saying, let's not go this direction. Now, one final point. There's a guy in Melbourne, Australia, named Siracusa, who's a leading expert on nuclear weapons and Asian geopolitics. And what he said that was covered in the Fox paper in Melbourne yesterday is that a nuclear war between the United States and China is inevitable, given the U.S. deployment of this Asia pivot idea. And he said the Chinese, at a certain point, will have no option but to counterstrike. And so here you have in Asia and in Europe, and then you can add the Middle East, where we may not have nuclear weapons involved yet, but we do have a war of extermination that's targeting both Russia and China and India. All of this is being directed by Obama. Obama is a front for these British geopolitical thinkers who run the policies of the major banks, who are behind the idea of a global banker dictatorship. You can call it New World Order or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
They know that their financial system is on its last legs. They've got to get loot from everywhere and anywhere, and they're willing to go to war, if necessary, to preserve and protect their right to loot. And that's why we're in this situation. And you have people in the Congress who know elements of it. They know our policy in the Middle East is completely insane. They know that what we're doing in Ukraine is crazy. And I mentioned there was an amendment to the National Defense Appropriations Act introduced by Democrat John Conyers and conservative Republican Ted Yoho of Florida. So you have the most liberal Democrat and most conservative Republican. And it said no U.S. funds should go toward training or arming the neo-Nazi Azov Brigade in Ukraine. So it was an admission in that amendment that we are arming and training neo-Nazis in Ukraine. That amendment passed unanimously. Now, at the same time that amendment passed, Yatsenyuk, the prime minister of Ukraine, who says we're prepared to go to war against Russia and we need U.S. help, was getting his butt kissed by people like John McCain and Lindsey Graham. So you have these senators promoting war with Russia in Ukraine, and the entire House voting against it. Interesting, huh?
Yeah, it's so bizarre. It's like a day in the psych ward. It's like dealing with people banging their head against the wall and saying things over and over again, and looking at the ceiling and howling and making weird sounds. It's like a day in a psych ward with people that are completely psychotic.
Well, he's living up to his name, John McInsane.
Yeah, well, I think that we should change his name for him. We'll actually put in the fee. How's that?
Well, and you have on the Republican side, I mean, I watched Jeb Bush smirk through his announcement the other day. You don't have, with the possible exception of Rand Paul, who is interesting on a number of issues, you don't have anyone on the Republican side who's remotely qualified to be a local dog catcher, much less president.
Well, look at the comments by the good-looking Hispanic representative that says, if you don't like war, you don't elect me. Did you hear that from Rubio? I couldn't believe it. I thought, do you need to make these kind of statements, idiot? I mean, you can schmooze the Hispanic population, and you can say how all these platitudes about building jobs, but you don't make bold statements like, if you don't like war, don't elect me. I'm thinking, what? We haven't been through enough war and had enough disabled men and enough destroyed economy that we can't even run a proper healthcare system for our country. How ridiculous.
Yep.
Just sickening. Yeah, it's just sickening. These people need to go away. Again, the websites are LaRouchePAC.com and the EIR Executive Intelligence Review, LaRouchePUB.com, LaRouchePUB.com. Hardy, let's continue the analysis. I think when people start seeing this, I expect a decrease in the velocity of money, contraction of credit, not an economic collapse, but a very major correction, which means the first world nations will suffer badly. Third world nations will starve to death as the famine gets quite serious because of the climate shift. It's caused by galactic and solar events, certainly not what's happening on the Earth, and it's also aggravated by geoengineering the climate by fools in the United Nations and these international agencies that figure they can control the climate without consulting nations or people. And then I expect this fall the peace treaty to result after probably a lot more blood and destruction in the Middle East after the Iranians close the strait, because that's going to happen. And the war drums are beating, and I'm sure Putin and China do not want to go to war.
No, and the only thing I would say I disagree with you on is that we are headed toward a full collapse. I don't think they can avoid it now.
Well, it's going to happen in steps, though. The first, it'll be stages. It'll be like that movie San Andreas, where the building doesn't fully collapse; it partially collapses, and you hear and it's crunching down. But the first crunch is going to be really big this fall. And it'll take years for it to talk
about a salami-style collapse. That you have a slice here, a slice there, but we're beyond that now. But the important thing is that there are voices speaking out on this. We just had a conference. The Schiller Institute had a conference in Paris where we had 400 people from 30 nations. And Mrs. LaRouche gave a keynote on the idea of the BRICS, how you can actually use global infrastructure developments to generate real credit to the physical economy, which will allow for an expansion of not just jobs, but productive activity. You can take young people and put them into doing something worthwhile with their lives. And in addition to Mrs. LaRouche's comments, she was followed by the first official, the first deputy counsel of the Russian embassy in Paris. He spoke, backing her up. A person from the Chinese Academy of Sciences who's a professor, but also on the board of the Chinese government's Silk Road policy, the idea of the new development bank. He spoke, backing up Mrs. LaRouche. A top Indian government official spoke. We had a top official from the Greek Syriza party, who's a member of the European Parliament, who spoke and brought the audience to their feet because he said, we're not going to sacrifice our people anymore for the benefit of these criminal bankers. And he was followed by a colonel from the French army who was one of the last remaining people who worked with de Gaulle in the 60s, who immediately stood up after this Greek person and said, today we are all Greeks. So in other words, we're not all Charlie Hebdo, we're all Greeks. We're all here to fight this corrupt swindle financial system. So, there are people around the world who are moving on these issues. Now, in the United States, we're getting some motion now. That's what the important point is of the defeat of Obama. Now, I'm calling on your listeners, many of whom are cynical and skeptical that we can do anything. Look what happened in the Congress last week. The bums who sit in the U.S. Congress decided to teach Obama a lesson. Let's teach him a real lesson by throwing him out. Now, many of the people reported, like this one African-American congressman who was leaning towards supporting Obama just to give him the benefit of the doubt. What she said is that the calls from my constituents were 100-1 against the TransPacific Partnership, and ultimately I represent them, not the president.
Right.
This is happening.
In other words, if you got a black constituent, you're going to lose your job. In fact, they've included in this so-called agreement, which they try to call it an agreement when really it's a treaty, which should go through a two-thirds majority, will destroy the black community. It will destroy the middle class. It will import millions of jobs and thousands of more factories. And
that's
it won't
why
be
a
good
lot of
for
the Black Caucus voted against the president.
Right,
and, so
and it won't it won't be helpful to these other countries either, because the transnational corporations will extract more from these people with no environmental standards, no occupational standards. In China, there's 600 people every day either get permanently injured or die in China because of poor environmental industrial standards. I know because I'm an Ahmed specialist as well. And I can tell you what's happening. This is going to get a lot worse, but we do have a possibility. Just want to make this quick rant here. This is the future that LaRouche talks about, the energy of flux density. We can have, in 5 to 20 years, we will have conquered human senescence and much of aging. We will have energy technology like the wing generator and light sail that can replace nuclear. We will have a ability to stabilize the climate without dangerous geoengineering with nanoparticles. We will be able to have a collaboration between scientists in different parts of the world to protect us from near space objects and galactic events that interact directly with the plasma physics of our planet and our weather systems. We'll be able to stabilize the biosphere and stop things like nuclear fission energy like Fukushima Daiichi, so it'll be a stable world that'll have nuclear fusion technology and other energy technologies that will make it safe in a world where war will be something of the past, where it won't be an option.
This is what the BRICS option represents. And we now have in the United States a recognition that Obama is a problem and has to go. But there's not enough.
Gee, I think we lost our connection. We'll have to reconnect with Harley. I guess let's just call him back. Maybe the powers that be didn't want to hear his last rant. So let's reconnect with Harley, and we have a few more minutes left. Yeah, I see a future where we can have a world safe without war, a world safe where people will not tolerate extreme Islam or extreme religions that are going to cause death and destruction, where true Christianity shines and we control the politics and everyone has the right to become a sovereign in a world where the Constitution and the Republic of America is spread around the world, not democracy, but republic, which means human beings from their moment of conception to natural death is respected, where we respect other living things, and we literally redirect our energies and our intelligence into creating a safe world, not only for us, but for other species, where we spread it across the stars and start to interact with advanced civilizations in other worlds, where we realize that we need to terraform Mars and other planets and spread our ideas across the cosmos, and where we have a world that's safe for people to grow up and live extended lifespans in a non-dangerous world where even if we got human senescence conquered in the next 20 years, if we don't conquer the increasing violence, people won't live longer. They'll just look better when they die. And I mentioned this comment to Dr. Ron Klatz, and I see it coming. I see a time when, I don't see Harley back there. I guess we'll try to recall him. I see the message there. But I think it's really important people understand. Go to LaRouchePAC.com, call them 800-922-2907 to connect with Harley. Find out there are some things we can do to try to get impeachment of Obama. Stop stupid comments in the Catholic Church by the Pope. You know, if there's enough people contact their cardinals and their bishops to say, Pope, stop making comments supporting something you don't understand, that's going to harm the human population and cut down the human species. Stop making comments that suggest you're going to make a dialogue with other religions you're not compatible with, including Islam, which is a satanic religion, or Sabbatean Judaism. Stop making comments saying it's okay if you're an atheist or transhumanist and we're all a big tent. We're not. Let's dialogue with people who deal with the facts of the nature of what a human being is, what the nature of our galaxy and the universe and our God is, and deal with reality rather than delusions. And in a population of people here in America, we're finally reaching the point where even the Democrats are pulling back and saying, we don't want this. We don't want what Obama's selling. He came in basically as a huckster to sell us that he's going to be a black president and support the displaced black people or people of color or people that are poor whites. No, he's not. In fact, they're in a worse position now than when he came into power. And he talked about hope and change. Yeah, at the end of his terms now, you'll have no hope, and all you have left in your pocket is change. No dollars. And even that they want to take away because they want to get rid of cash. So check out LaRouchePAC.com, LaRouchePUB.com, and get involved. Call Harley at 800-922-2907. If you want to call into the show anytime, next hour, will be open lines on Nutrimed or any topic. You need to tell the board op exactly what your question or statement is. That number is 800-259-5791, 800-259-5791. Anywhere in the world you can call in. Our three guests is Clint Richardson on the Corporation Nation. It's going to be an amazing discussion. And Jonathan Gray will be on right after that. So do stay tuned. We'll be back in just a moment with Hour 2 coming up.